second Colloquium on Independent Publishing. I'm Jeffrey Lawrence, and I'm a faculty member in English and Comparative Literature here at Rutgers. It's great to see so many people from Rutgers and beyond. Last year we did the first Colloquium on Independent Publishing here during, happened to fall in the 4 days of our historic Rutgers strike. Some of you were there. We ended up switching shifting in a matter of days to the First Reformed Church of New Brunswick. Carolina Sanchez, there she is, who's the co-organizer for this year, made a heroic effort to change at the last minute, and we did things there. But it's nice to be able to have this day here on the actual Rutgers campus. And so it's great to see you all. I wanted to just give a little bit of a context for the colloquium, and then I'll move into introductions for our plenary panelists today. So our first colloquium was organized by a group of 7 of us who were interested in independent publishing in the Hispanophone world, working across 4 institutions, Rutgers, CUNY, Princeton, and NYU, and including professors and graduate students. So last year we invited 11 publishers from throughout Latin America and Spain to come to basically the East Coast and to have conversations about the state of publishing in the Hispanophone world. We were at 4 different institutions over 3 days and then did a book fair the day after. It was really amazing, but we felt like for the second colloquium, we wanted to make it a little bit more manageable. So we decided to just do it.
Without a strike.
Yeah, without a strike.
Next time.
And so we decided basically, sort of collectively, that our practice or our plan moving forward would be to have the publishing colloquia at a different site each year and make it a little bit smaller and more manageable. So this year's colloquium is a single day. We've done that here. And again, our goal in the future is to have this rotate. Next year, we're hoping it's going to be in Princeton with Nora Muniz, and to continue this basically going for as long as we can. So this year, in terms of Rutgers organization, Carolina Sanchez and I worked together. She just defended her dissertation in the Spanish and Portuguese. She was working, right? Working very hard. And as we were envisioning the plenary session, we really we had 2 goals in mind, basically. The first one is that we wanted to find participants who had real practical expertise in the publishing world, right? Who had actually worked in publishing as editors, but also who had a kind of a scholarly interest as well in the publishing industry. So we're kind of straddling both of those worlds. The other thing that was important for us is that although we had focused the first colloquium and the group is still focused on the Hispanophone world, we felt that it was important to create a dialogue with people coming from who had studied and worked in other geographical areas, other linguistic traditions. Because I think it's very important, we want to understand the specificities of Latin America and Spain in terms of independent publishing, but also understand that they're part of a broader system. So I'm really thrilled that for our plenary roundtable today, we have 3 scholar editors, John Thompson, Ana Cecilia Calle, and Gustavo Guerrero, who are familiar with multiple linguistic and cultural geographies of publishing and also have significant experience in the publishing industry as well. I want to just also recognize Dante Gonzalez, who participated in the first panel of today at 1 p.m. With Jorge Marcone of Spanish and Portuguese on the possibilities and challenges of publishing literatures in indigenous languages in Peru. So a wide geographical and linguistic area covered. So before I introduce the panelists, I just want to say a few thank yous to the many people who have helped both this year and last year, because we didn't really get a chance to do this last year. So the Rutgers Initiative for the book and Leah Price, just for the support, both this year and last year, and we have she has a sign-up sheet for the Rutgers Book Initiative.
If you're willing to add your email to the list, and if you're local and would like information about our makerspace, please take one and pass along.
The Center for Cultural Analysis and Colin Yeager, again, support this year and last year. The Indigenous Studies Working Group, and particularly Camilla Thompson. English, Meredith McGill, and Spanish and Portuguese, Marcy Schwartz, for all of the support last year and this year. So thank you, everyone, for that. Also, just a very quick reminder that my colleague Andrew Goldstone will be hosting a conversation tomorrow at 12 p.m. in Murray Hall 302 with John Thompson on Thompson's most recent book, Book Wars, The Digital Revolution in Publishing. There will be lunch. It will be a great discussion. And we can circulate, if you're interested, the readings are here to scan. For tomorrow, you can come if you haven't done the reading, but if you want to do it here, we've got a number of these that are circulating throughout. And then I also just wanted to express my gratitude to Maria Knapp and Bee Hom for all of their work on this, making this possible this year. And then also special thanks to Rosie Ruiz, who's been working with international participants with a very Kafkaesque payment system at Rutgers, which is also true of other places, but has really been helping the past few years. And then just finally, I want to acknowledge the members of our group of studies of independent publishing, the people who are here, Rosalia Reyes, Carolina Davila, and Nora Muniz here, and then Isabel Gusardo, a recent graduate of Rutgers, Michelle Mendoza and Tatiana Rojas, who couldn't be here, and last but not least, Carolina Sanchez, for incredible co-organizing. Okay. So I'm going to introduce the speakers. The plan is for them, they're going to start with an initial, talking for 10 to 12 minutes, start out about sort of their sense, their trajectory through independent publishing, and also they're coming from different places, right, around the globe. So they'll also be talking a little bit about the specific obstacles that they see in the particular geographical area where they work or where they live. And then we will have a response by Marcy Schwartz. She'll pose some questions for the discussants, and then we'll open things up for Q&A. So the plan is to end at around 6:15, and then we'll have dinner that comes then, which will start at 6:30. So please do stick around for the dinner, and for chatting, we also have wine out there. Okay, so great. John Thompson, I'll start and go in order. John Thompson is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Cambridge University in England. He's one of the foremost scholars of the Anglophone publishing industry. His many books include Books in the Digital Age from 2005, Merchants of Culture from 2010, and Book Wars from 2021. He is also the director of Polity Books, an independent publishing house founded in 1984 that has published some of the world's leading thinkers in the social sciences and humanities. Ana Cecilia Calle is a Colombian publisher, educator, and sound enthusiast. She is a founding member of Himpar Editores, an independent Colombian press that publishes fiction, poetry, and nonfiction, and she also serves as the co-president of the Colombian Independent Publishers Chamber. She also coordinates the program in publishing and multimedia creation and production in the communications department of the Universidad Javeriana in Bogotá. Gustavo Guerrero is professor of Latin American literature and culture, is full professor of contemporary Latin American literature and cultural history at CY Paris, where he also serves as the director of the master's program in publishing studies and book history. He is the author of numerous prize-winning essays, and he also currently works as a publisher at the Gallimard House in Paris in the areas of Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American literature. And finally, our respondent, Marcy Schwartz, is professor of Latin American literature and culture at Rutgers-New Brunswick. Her most recent book is Public Pages, Reading Along the Latin American Streetscape from 2018. She has published extensively on the relationship between urban space and the literary imagination, and co-edited volumes on Latin American literary translation and photography. And she's also devoted a significant amount of her scholarship and teaching to the Latin American Cartonera Publishing Initiative. So please welcome over to John Thompson.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I'd like to thank you and others, Andrew and others, who have invited me. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is a fantastic program that you have, and I'm really pleased to be part of it. So, Jeff asked me to say something about what aspects of my trajectory might have led me to be invited to a roundtable workshop on independent publishing. So I guess there are two, and he touched on them, but I'll elaborate a bit more. One is that I am an academic sociologist. I have worked for many years on the sociology of media organizations. And in the 1990s, I decided I wanted to embark on a large empirical project on the transformation of media organizations. And I was working on different media organizations, and I began to think about which would be the best for me to really focus my research on and to carry out a large piece of empirical research. And I realized, after I thought about it, that the one area of the media industries that academics have really neglected is, in fact, the oldest media industry, the book publishing industry. It was ironic. In fact, it was doubly ironic because it was the one media industry that academics were actively involved in. But they knew nothing about it. So I thought, well, there's an interesting puzzle. This is a field that has been completely ignored by academics, certainly academic social scientists. Of course, I shouldn't be too sweeping here because historians have long been interested in the history of the book. That's true. But in terms of an understanding of the contemporary publishing industry, there was nothing that was contemporary, that was really recent and up to date. The best study had been done in the 1970s by a group of sociologists here in the US called Books, the Culture and Commerce of Publishing, and it's a very good study, but you just read it today and it looks like it's from another age. It was really, it was about the book publishing industry in the 1960s and early 70s, and of course the industry has changed dramatically since then. So I decided to grapple with this paradox, and to really focus on what it would be. What would it be to have a social science of the publishing industry? What would it look like to have a social science of the publishing industry? And there wasn't one, really, so it needed to be invented. And so I set out to try to establish a kind, well, in my case, a sociology. It could be an anthropology, but it was a sociology because I'm a sociologist. So a sociology of the book publishing industry. And I set out to do it in an ambitious way. I didn't want to just study, one little aspect of it. I thought, let's really grapple with the whole industry and see if we can find a way to think about it coherently. And so I've worked a lot with a French sociologist, the very good French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. He was a good friend and colleague, and I really liked his theory of fields, and I thought this is a good starting point. So I took the theory of fields as my starting point, and I said, okay, so how do we analyze the world of book publishing as a field? And then I realized as soon as I said that was my first mistake, because it wasn't a field. It was multiple fields. And that's one thing that the theory of fields helps you to see, that it isn't one field, it is numerous fields connected in certain complex ways, but you have to differentiate them to understand them. So I realized that I had to start somewhere, and I couldn't start with the whole industry. I had to break it into fields. And so I started with the field of academic publishing, which turned out actually to be two separate fields. The field of scholarly monograph publishing, i.e. the university presses, and the field of higher education publishing, i.e. the textbook publishers like Pearson and McGraw-Hill and so on and so forth. And I analyzed those two fields in great detail. That was my first big project, and that was Books in the Digital Age. And I was very aware that when I was doing that, I was just putting to one side completely the other fields of publishing. And I should say also that I realized that as part of the theory of fields, you had to think of it in certain linguistic and territorial ways. That was part of the concept of field. So I wasn't studying publishing across the world. This was Anglo-American publishing, academic publishing to begin with. And then in the second project, I thought, okay, well, let's take the same approach that I developed and apply it to the world of trade publishing. So Anglo-American trade publishing. And that was, again, another 5-year piece of empirical research. And by empirical research, I mean, I threw myself into the field. And I basically, spent lots of time in New York and London and inside the publishing houses, interviewing hundreds of people, hundreds and hundreds of hours of interview material. And then trying to figure it out. It's like a maze, okay? So it's like, the metaphor I always like, it's like a picture puzzle, where all the pieces are thrown on the floor and they're all jumbled about. And you don't know what they are a picture of. You don't know what they're a picture of, or even whether they are a picture of anything at all. They could be from 10 different puzzles. And your job as the sociologist is to try to figure out how to put those pieces together, to figure out what those pieces are a picture of. And that's what I call the logic of the field. So I set out to reconstruct the logic of each of these fields. And in Merchants of Culture, I tried to do that for the field of Anglo-American trade publishing. And when I did that project, I looked at, of course, all kinds of publishers in the field of trade publishing, from Penguin Random House, which were then 2 companies, Penguin and Random House, HarperCollins, Hachette, etc., to the independent publishers, medium-sized and small, including many small, tiny little independent publishers. And that's the first thing, I guess, that leads me to this roundtable. That is, I got to understand something about the world of independent publishing within the field of Anglo-American trade publishing. And I have retained that interest in what are these structural forces in the field that shape what independent publishers can and cannot do. The second thing that leads me, I guess, to this roundtable is that I also, of course, know this industry from the inside, because back in the 1980s, as Jeff mentioned, I did start a publishing company. It was a rather perhaps foolish thing to do, but I did start a publishing company with 2 academic colleagues. We were all 3 social scientists. We didn't quite know what we were getting ourselves in for. But we started a publishing company in Cambridge, and it turned out to be a great success. And so for the last 20, 30 years, I've run that publishing company. And so I know the world of book publishing from the inside as well as from the external perspective as a sociologist, from both the inside and the outside. So I guess those are the things that bring me to the roundtable. Jeff asked me to say a few things about what I would see in the field that I am familiar with as some of the challenges and issues that face independent publishers today. I think the first thing I would say is that, when I really seriously studied the world of independent publishing in the Anglo-American field of trade publishing, I was really struck by the diversity and vitality of this domain. It is really lively. It's really, to most people, it's completely off their radar screens. They don't see it at all. But when you begin to study it and you begin to probe, you see just how many independent publishers there are. There are just so many. And they are so varied, from tiny little operations run from a kitchen table to, established companies that have been going for many, many years. And so it's a varied space, it's a dynamic space, full of energy and vitality, some great publishing taking place in this space. So that's the first thing that I would say. But the second thing I would say is that it's a space characterized by chronic vulnerability. Chronic vulnerability. And so this is it's a really difficult thing to do. It's a really difficult thing to do. And it's difficult to survive and flourish as an independent publisher. It's really, really hard, especially in a field like the Anglo-American field, which is dominated by large corporate players, 5 in the case of the Anglo-American field, 5 large, powerful conglomerates, and by large retail organizations. And these are tiny little independent players. This is really hard to make it work. It's really hard to make it work. And so they are characterized by chronic vulnerability. So bearing that in mind, let me just focus on 4 issues very briefly, because I'm conscious of the time. 4 issues, say something very briefly about these 4 issues that I think are real issues for independent publishers. The first, in many ways, the most important issue that indie publishers have to grapple with is just the problem of sales and profitability. It's a problem of keeping going from one year to the next. It's the classic cash flow problem, exacerbated by the publishing industry, because publishing is an industry in which you have to invest today, not for tomorrow, but for about 2-3 years down the road. So you have to have cash reserves in order to invest for the future. And the large corporate players have very deep pockets. The small indie publishers don't have pockets at all. So they are maxing out on their credit cards from one day to the next. And it's a struggle. And every day they're trying to think, okay, so what do we do to try to ensure that we're going to be around tomorrow? To try to ensure that we can pay our bills without going bust. You know, the greatest danger for any business is running out of cash. That's the great threat that every business faces, because if you can't meet your debts, you're bankrupt. So you have to figure out how to have enough cash. And the small indie publishers are always struggling with this cash flow problem, as I say, exacerbated by the temporal structure of the publishing industry. So no doubt that that is by far the biggest issue that indie publishers face. And they all struggle with it. They find it difficult to get money. Banks won't lend it to them. They find it difficult to get a credit line. And they're basically relying on the goodwill of others. So it's a challenge for indie publishers. For some more than others, but it's a big challenge, and it always has been and always will be. The second issue that indie publishers face, and it's a really serious issue for them, is losing their successful authors. All right, so one of the things that indie publishers do really well is they're like the R&D of the publishing industry. They're willing to take chances. Okay, they'll find an author who's not been published or never published before, and they'll take a chance with this author in this book. And sometimes it'll really work, and the author and the book will be very successful. Great. Now, ideally, in an ideal world, having cultivated that, having invested in this author, you would then work with the author on the second and the third and the fourth book. But the structure of the field is such that as soon as a book becomes successful, the agents who are vultures in the industry will come immediately and say, wow, there's a success, let's get in touch with that author, let's tempt the author away, let's become the author's agent, and then with the next book, book number 2, we will go out and test the market, is the phrase that they will use. We will test the market. And then they will create an auction, and the big publishers will always win the auctions because their pockets are much deeper. So the chronic problem of small publishers is they cannot retain their successful authors, or they find it difficult to retain their successful authors. And that means they have to start again from scratch. So this exacerbates their financial difficulties and their cash flow problems because they cannot retain the most successful creative forces that they have helped to cultivate. The third issue that many independent publishers face, a really difficult issue for them, is the problem of distribution. This is absolutely critical for them. Because the thing is that distribution is the one area of the publishing business where there really are economies of scale. Where being big makes a big difference. Because you have to have a warehouse, you have to have sales force, These are expensive things. And as a small independent publisher, you simply cannot afford any of that stuff. So what are your options? Well, basically you have two options, and only two. One is that you buy a service from a distributor, like in the case of the US now, it's Ingram's, because Ingram's have also consolidated all the potential distribution opportunities in the US into their operation. They bought them up. And so Ingram is now the big distributor. And so you have to buy in a service from them. And of course that does not come cheap. You have to pay for that. And it's expensive. So that's, you know, a very big drain on the limited finances of a small independent publisher. If you don't do that, you can also buy in the services from the large corporate players or the larger publishers who offer their distribution services as a third-party supplier to an independent publisher at a price, of course. And so again, it's expensive to do it, but you can piggyback on their services in order to achieve some kind of distribution. But even with those two options, which are expensive, you still achieve limited distribution. It tends to be geographically confined. So the thing about the Anglo-American world, or let's put it more broadly, the English-speaking world of publishing, is that it is essentially global. It's essentially global. And yet, what tends to happen is that these distribution services tend to be geographically specific. So you can buy in Ingram services in the US and Canada, but it isn't going to take you overseas. It's not going to take you to the UK, it's not going to take you to Europe, it's not going to take you to Australia, New Zealand, etc., etc. So it's very difficult to get global distribution. Very, very difficult. Although that's the, of course, the opportunity that the English-speaking world offers is that English is spoken all over the world, and therefore if you can achieve that distribution all over the world, you can do really, really well. And it makes it a much different kind of space than, say, French publishing, which has only Quebec and Switzerland, apart from France. But you know, the English-speaking publishers have the global sphere, if you can get it. And that's a big if, because it requires distribution. The fourth and final issue, which I'll mention very briefly, is, I can put it in one word, Amazon. All publishers in the English-speaking world are now dependent on one gigantic retailer, Amazon. This is unprecedented in the history of the publishing industry. Now, Amazon is the most powerful player that the publishing industry has ever known in 500 years. I mean, I'm going to put it bluntly. It has never happened before that one retailer now controls 50 to 60% of the revenue of all these publishing houses. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And if you are an independent publisher, that puts you in a very vulnerable position, because it's very difficult not to do business with Amazon. It's very difficult. If they're accounting for 50 to 60% of your revenue, you can't just pull out. And therefore, Amazon are in an incredibly powerful bargaining position when it comes to negotiating the terms of trade. And now if you're Penguin Random House, you have leverage in that. But if you're Melville House, you know, how much leverage have you got in that bargaining process? Zero. You need Amazon much more than Amazon needs you. And they know it. And therefore, all the bargaining chips are in their hands. So you're in a very vulnerable position. Now, this is much worse in the Anglo-American field than it is in the field of France, or the field of Germany, or the field of Norway, for one simple reason. In the Anglo-American world, there is no price fixing. Publishers cannot fix prices of books. All right, it's just not legal to do it. You can't do it. So, whereas in France, you can. Publishers fix a price. They say this is going to cost, 19 euros, and that's the price that customers have to pay in the bookstores. under certain conditions. But in the English-speaking world, yes, the publisher can fix the price, but the retailer does not have to sell it at that price. The retailer can discount it. And if you are huge like Amazon, your capacity to discount is huge. And therefore you can undermine all your competitors through high discounting. And that greatly increases their strength and explains partly why they have over 50% of the retail sales of most publishers today. Okay, I've run over time, I'm sure, so I'm going to stop.